long ago, when the pyramids were still young, women were perfecting what your upper middle class dad can only dream of replicating in his garage. Yes, it was the women of ancient Egypt that refined the Sumerian art of brewing. These were the first recorded cases of women brewing beer. But what does that have to do with witches? Well, today on The Poopy Show, I'll uncover beer's girlish sissy origins and investigate what surprising connections it may have to witchcraft. But let's go back and start from the beginning. It is widely believed that alcohol was discovered and not invented. In fact, some historians have even pushed the beer not bread hypothesis, which argues that agriculture was actually established not for the sake of making sandwiches, but for the sake of making bad decisions. I mean, there would be no obvious benefit to abandoning the Chad nomadic lifestyle for the virgin farmer one if all you got out of it was wheat gruel. However, this basic wheat gruel was introduced to natural yeast, which was perhaps supplied by insects, and that fermented it and turned it into beer. Okay, time to invent the Camaro. Oh yeah. And the thing is, beer is actually easier to make than bread, and it makes you happier, so there is some validity to this theory. But the women of ancient Egypt did not brew for the sake of getting hammered. They did it because beer was the perfect way to preserve and level up grains into a more nutritional beverage, which was a staple in the diets of Egyptians as far back as 6000 BC. In fact, at a 2% alcohol content, the workforce behind the building of the pyramids were given 8 pints of it daily as part of their rations. So there you have it, kids. That's how the pyramids were built. Not aliens or lasers, just good old Miller 64. So your company fridge having a few Corpo Diet Cokes in it should not be considered a company benefit. Wake up, people. But even as a type of liquid lunch like a cool and hardcore version of Soylent, it was still seen as divine, had its own corresponding goddess, and was enjoyed in large quantities during celebrations. And this tradition of females brewing the sacred frat boy elixir continued. In medieval England, those female brewers were known as alemaids. We know that the UK is pretty big on pubs, but currently for every 1,700 people, there's one pub. Well, just a few centuries ago, there was one alehouse for every 150. But that's because ale was essential to the common folk. It provided not only sustenance, but also hydration, in a time when every water source in England was practically 40% human feces and 10% rats. The alcohol content was low, and its purpose was to preserve the drink rather than get you drunk, much like in Egypt. And also like the goddess Saint Brigid was the patron saint of beer in Ireland. She was said to be able to turn water into beer, like a cool and hardcore version of Jesus. Anyways, back to the alewives. When someone says witch, what do you imagine? Some lady riding a broom with a big-ass pointy hat? The edgy rival to the Winx franchise? Or maybe an old green chick looming over a cauldron guarded by a weird and judgy cat familiar? Etsy wasn't that popular back in the Middle Ages, mainly because its primary export, which we all know is soap, wasn't that popular back then either.
Stinky!
But all those women brewing as a side hustle had to advertise their business somehow, right? Well, to stand out in busy marketplaces, the alewives would wear tall hats. And the beer? They sold that from cauldrons. Also, women that sold from their homes used another form of advertisement, the ale stick, which they would put on top of their door. And this ale stick was, well, a stick with twigs tied to its end. So, something that resembles a broom. And the cherry on top, beer is made from grains. Who likes grains? Rodents. Who likes rodents? Tumblr millennials. But also cats. So every box has been ticked. Bippity boppity boos. Alewives were witches, right? Well, unfortunately, no. There's a lot of misinformation going around about these women being accused of witchcraft when there's actually no evidence of that at all. These witchy attributes are modern post-witch trial inventions, because the pointed hat was simply fashionable at the time. There's no written records of brooms being associated with witchcraft, and although seen as demonic since the 13th century, cats were associated with witches or thought to be witches themselves in the early modern period. But most importantly, I think you wouldn't want to harm a lady that makes a killer brew, you know? Still, there's one more line of reasoning that ties into this misconception. You can't argue the fact that beer is a weak-ass girly drink that throughout history was made by women. Heck, even kids drank it. A bunch. So, why is it now like, oh yeah, I drink beer. Drinking beer makes manly man me. Get female approval. Get strong. I can fix car, but not ride in it immediately because it's against the law. Football. Why is it that we have cold ones with the boys and not cold ones with the girls? This didn't happen because they burned all the witch brewers. The times just changed. The era of industrialization made beer a mass-produced product, and since the male factory workers of the time were the ones with all the money, beer rebranded itself to appeal to them. And that's where we are now. So did witches make garage IPAs? Probably. Who's to say? Is beer a girly drink? Yes, definitely. Men need to hunt swine, build houses, and die in the middle of the sea. Rum is a much more masculine drink, better suited to those types of activity. And I mostly wanted to talk about this because, hey, witches, Halloween, the spooky show? But what we definitely learned from this episode that it's not witches that are scary. It's a male-targeted advertisement.